awkward fact check between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell here that doesn't go in Trump's favor, but Donald Trump actually a lot more respectful than what you might have expected in touring the Federal Reserve here, especially since this morning Fox News, especially Fox Business, was hyping him up, suggesting Trump needs to go in there and throw around the marble, arguing that the marble's the wrong type and I'm a developer, you're doing this wrong. Donald Trump actually taking quite the high road here, despite complaining about the basement. But let's listen to the fact check first.
Construction, and we're with the chairman, as you know. Chairman, come on over. And we're just taking a look at what's happening. You know, it's a tough construction job. They're building basements where they didn't exist or expanding them, and a lot of...
The reason they're building basements where they didn't exist is because these buildings in DC are right next to the National Mall. And when you have buildings right next to the National Mall, you have to follow extremely stringent design standards because they're a representation of the United States. So what ends up happening is you get really strict requirements that say, hey, you could do this, but you've got limits in terms of your height. You've got limits in terms of the design that you could use. There are a lot of restrictions that commissions ultimately put on historical buildings. And so when you look at the National Mall on the map, you'll see here, we've got the Washington Monument, you've got the World War II War Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, the Lincoln Memorial. All of this, mind you, was built in a swamp. You know, the Lincoln Memorial was built on top of what used to be just water. None of this existed. And if you actually zoom in right here, this is the Fed building right here. So the National Mall's here, Fed building's here. I've personally been there, and it's incredible that, you know, you're right next to the National Mall. I know this just looks like a road, but the point is, you've got the Lincoln Memorial over here, Washington Monument here, and it is a pretty critical street in Washington, D.C. That's one of the reasons why they're expanding down to maintain that or that sort of exterior impression of the building without violating a bunch of height restrictions, which, yeah, even the Federal Reserve has to follow. We almost like to think that, oh, well, you know, they'll be able to get an exception, right? Nope. Oh, everything in D.C.'s got to follow the same sort of historical look and standard.
Very expensive work, there's no question about it. And Tim has been with me for a long time, and you're in charge of the committee.
Indeed. One of the reasons why I wanted to see it was the overruns of the expenses, wanted to figure out why.
Yeah. So we're taking a look, and it looks like it's about $3.1 billion. It went up a little bit, or a lot.
Jerome Powell here shaking his head. This is where it starts getting a bit awkward.
So the 2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
I love how J. Powell actually jumps in and says, I'm not aware of that. But then I also love what Trump does next.
It just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody.
It just came out.
So here comes Trump's fact check. And then J. Powell slaps back again. This is like the craziest interaction because you get Donald Trump going, yeah, the numbers just went up again. J. Powell, no, they didn't. Yeah, they did. Pulls out paper. Powell's like, oh, crap. What is this? This is embarrassing. This is TV. This is what we pay TV for.
3.1, 3.2.
This came from us?
Yes. I don't know who does that.
You're including the Martin renovation. You just added our entire capital. Yeah, you just added in a third building is what that is.
You just added in a third building is what that is. And then look, Trump's like, oh, it appears I didn't quite understand which buildings we were referring to here. Most people don't, and that's okay. We've got some pictures to go through of these various different buildings, and I'll show you some of these different buildings. So remember, I showed you the front of the Eccles building right here, built in 1937. I showed you the front of this. So there are a few buildings here. The Martin building is actually this renovation completed 5 years ago. When the Federal Reserve acquired this to essentially expand their compound, if you will. I mean, you've got bollards and security everywhere. These are very highly, fortified buildings. They had to substantially renovate this. This was in disrepair. And they also have a third building that if we zoom It's actually from the back side. It's right here. It's a little hard to see on this side. We'll see if we can scoot over to the other side. But the Federal Reserve is now also renovating this building right here, which you can see, I mean, it's quite a bit of a renovation. I mean, windows are missing here, right? This is a pretty old building right here. In fact, this old building, I believe, was, yeah, here it is, the U.S. Public Health Service building. And it sits right next to the Eccles building. And it's being completely remodeled to actually make it functional again. This is a historic building built in the, well, let's see here. It was built also in the 30s. So you kind of had a bunch of buildings built on that, 1931. But it's even older than the Eccles building. So 1931 for this particular building, and the Eccles building was 1937. This is not the Martin building. This is considered the East building. Donald Trump includes the Martin building in the renovation budget for the Federal Reserve, which even though they overlap because this renovation began in 2019, you had massive cost overruns and delays because of not just COVID and inflation, which obviously things got a lot more expensive, but running into issues like groundwater contamination, asbestos, lead. You're basically trying to expand in a swamp. Very, very challenging. The Fed also wanted, according to the Wall Street Journal, to end up using, where was it? They wanted to use more glass to signal their transparency. But the commissions ended up revising this, requesting the incorporation of more marble because they wanted more of this sort of traditional 1930s look. And this is the National Capital Planning Commission and the Commission of Fine Arts. These are federal commissions that are not part of the Federal Reserve. They basically plan and work to make Washington, D.C. as, jewel-like as possible. And so when you look, it's actually outside commissions coming in telling you, no, spend more money here. No, we want actually this. We want you to spend more money on this. It's not all the Federal Reserve. Now, I'm not trying to defend everything the Federal Reserve does by any means, but this is a pretty epic moment. And having that extra context of 3 different buildings, I think is really helpful.
Third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished.
I know, but it's a building that's being built. It wasn't built 5 years ago, as Jay Powell says here. I think he's just speaking quickly. The renovation was completed 5 years ago. So Jay Powell's basically like, why are we still using that in this budget as a totally different renovation? Trump's like, all right, people don't usually talk back to me because I fire them. But I can't fire you.
Martin 5 years ago.
It's part of the overall work.
But it's
So,
not new.
So we're going to take a look. We're going to see what's happening, and it's got a long way. Do you expect any more additional cost overruns?
Don't expect them. We're ready for them, but we have a little bit of a reserve that we may use, but no, we don't. Expect to be finished in 2027. We're well along, as you can see.
Nice to take these off every once in a while when we're not under too much danger. So, any questions?
Mr. President, does the issue give you any? As a real estate developer, what would you do with a project manager who would be over budget?
Generally speaking, what would I do? I'd fire them.
Do you think this issue, Mr. President, gives you cause to do that?
Well, I'm here just really with the chairman. He's showing us around, showing us the work. And so I don't want to get that. I don't want to be personal. I just would like to see it get finished. And in many ways, it's too bad it started. But it did start. And it's been under construction for a long time. It's going to be a real long time because it looks like it's got a long way to go.
Yes, sir.
So,
President, are there things the chairman can say to you today that would make you back off some of the earlier criticism?
well, I'd love him to lower interest rates. But other than that, what can I tell you? The country's doing really well. I just briefed the chairman of the deal with Japan. Japan is putting up $550 billion in order to lower their tariffs a little bit. That way they have a little bit lower tariff. And they also opened their country to free trade, which nobody thought was even a possibility. And we get a zero tariff in the free trade. We don't pay tariffs, and they're going to pay 15% on everything they send into our country. So it's great. But they put up, as You could call it seed money. Let's call it seed money.
Yeah. A quick reminder, the Federal Reserve is also very protected. They hold gold deposits at the New York Fed, which if you ever go through the New York Fed building, you'll see that it's extremely highly guarded. I mean, you look and there are a lot of guns outside of the New York Fed building. One of the reasons is not because the Federal Reserve actually holds or buys gold. They don't. In fact, they are legally not supposed to buy gold. Remember, currency is supposed to be totally free floating. But if you look at the Fed New York building, it's really incredible. I mean, it's basically shielded by these giant, bomb concrete pads, if you will, bollards all the way around. And typically, you have folks with assault rifles on various different portions of the building. I don't know if we'll actually be able to find them in this Google Street View, but if you ever walk around this area, you'll find them, and they're all over the place. I'm actually surprised we can't see them right now, but this is a very, very secure building because it's essentially a gold vault, which is kind of remarkable to think about. Yeah, I can't find a single one today. Well, anytime I've ever been there, you've had a lot of guns out, but very, very secure building, and so, that makes me, sort of reminds me that if you ever want gold and you want somebody else to secure it for you, check out Lear. Did you know that central banks are loading up on gold, including the Chinese central bank? They're dumping dollars and bonds and they're buying gold hand over fist. And this is why I want to introduce to you Lear Capital. They're a trusted partner for when it comes to buying gold or silver. The reason a lot of central banks are diversifying to real money is because they don't have to worry about currency risk. They don't have to worry about the debasing of a currency. Instead, they can invest their capital into something that they expect will be protected from other central banks around the world printing money or crazy fiscal policies by Congresses and legislatures and parliaments all across the world. So this is, I think, why central banks are making a smart move and they're buying gold or even silver instead of just relying on currency-based investments. It's too risky. What do you trust more, gold or a politician? And that's why, much like how I like investing in real estate, precious metals are a hard asset. I know they're going to be there for me, and if you want to get access to some hard assets that at least Goldman Sachs says could reach $4,500 or more within the next year, heck, now all of a sudden you've even got institutions across the board saying, maybe it is time to pick up some more gold, you might consider Lear Capital. They're an education-first company, no pressure to buy. A company with a 24-hour risk-free purchase guarantee, over 27 years in the business, almost 30 now. Over $3 billion in trusted transactions, thousands of 5-star reviews, lots of gold companies to choose from, but Lear Capital is one that I trust, and I highly encourage at least give them a call. 1-800-707-4575, or go to learkevin.com for your free gold and silver reports. And remember, special offer to first-time buyers who mention that you heard about Lear Capital from me. You can get up to $15,000 in bonus gold or silver with a qualifying purchase. So, take a peek at Lear Capital. Go to learkevin.com. Use my sponsored link in the description down below. Here's the second part of that walkthrough or media moment from Donald Trump at the Federal Reserve.
Back on the construction site, if you remember, not so long ago, we rebuilt the old post office into the Trump Hotel, and we sold it to Waldorf Astoria, and it was a great success, and we had great luck with the building. We did a good job. We built it quickly and relatively inexpensively for about $200 million. And that was a big hotel, big project. But we looked around, and Tim Scott's here someplace. Tim, come on up. You saw what we saw. And the big thing is to get it done. They have to get it done. They have to get it finished. And very importantly, we have to get interest rates lowered in our country. Our country is the hottest in the world right now, but the one section, people are pretty much unable to buy housing because the interest rates are too high.
I'll speed this up. Donald Trump talks a bit here, talking about, hey, they used a lot of plywood, maybe more plywood than I would have used to protect the surfaces of the building. This is because if you have a lot of sensitive surfaces, whether they're brushed, sort of brass surfaces or marble surfaces, people walking by with tool belts can end up scratching these surfaces. So it's not uncommon. It's also very, very normal to look at a project like this Fed building that's a historical site that's expected to take 5-6 years to build it out with some form of fortification. Donald Trump does take issue with that, but he doesn't take issue with the expansion underground. He recognizes that's what's in the budget, that's what's happening. He does recognize that, hey, maybe people could have parked somewhere else and they don't need underground parking because it's so expensive, and maybe people could just walk a few blocks. But then this building is also used for visits from dignitaries around the world, and so this is why these sort of things are included. It's not so every single person can go park underground at the Federal Reserve and have a shorter commute, so to speak. But overall, Donald Trump is relatively reasonable with his comments here. He doesn't really give Jay Powell a hard time, at least what we could see on camera. We did see Donald Trump sort of say, hey, we'd love for him to lower interest rates, and then sort of pat Jerome Powell on the back. But beyond that, we didn't get too much aggressiveness from Trump here. And I'm kind of thankful that we didn't get more of that. It didn't have to be that. I think we've already had enough from Donald Trump, sort of lambasting Jay Powell over the social media airwaves, if you will.
At the end of the day, the point is that instead of talking about interest rates, instead of talking about first-time home buyers, instead of talking about the heat in our economy, that's a good thing. We're talking about an overrun on the Federal Reserve building,
which has really become a hot button issue, because back when the Federal Reserve began this project, they actually had massive billions of dollars of surpluses from essentially holding treasuries and paying out substantially lower on deposits for they would buy treasuries with higher yields, and then they were paying out essentially zero to banks that would deposit with the Federal Reserve. And so they made that spread. Now the opposite is true. Treasuries are yielding lower than what the Fed is paying out on reserves. This is essentially how they set interest rates as high as they are. And of course, the rationale is, hey, we'll cut once we're convinced that inflation is down. The problem with that is, how can we be convinced that inflation is down when we don't know yet that those impacts of tariffs have really come all the way through? Look, for example, at the S&P Global U.S. Flash PMI this morning. Growth accelerates, but manufacturing dips, and the only reason we get a boost is because of services, which is fine. It's sort of a mixed report. But what you get in this mixed report is a steeper increase in cost inflation, which was increasingly passed through to customers. Resulting rate of inflation prices charged for goods and services was among the largest seen over the past 3 years. Business activity rose at a rate not seen since December, which is great. So what you have is exactly what the Fed is concerned about. This idea that, hey, the economy's at the moment doing fine, but inflation is rising based on some of these surveys at a rate we haven't seen in 3 years. And some of the increases in prices are the first that we have seen in multiple years. So let's see here. Yeah, look at this. Services price inflation accelerated to register the second steepest increase since April of 2023. And input cost inflation for manufacturers registered the second steepest rise since January of 2023. So in other words, hey, you're kind of getting a relatively strong report. Yeah, you missed on manufacturing, but services in the U.S. with more U.S. domestic spending holding up. While at the same time, being in this place of, hey, we've got more inflation. And the whole point of the Federal Reserve is to make sure that doesn't turn into some form of sustained form of inflation. Now, of course, people who are trying to shill for the job at the Federal Reserve, they are saying, oh, no, we're fine. Those are just going to be one-time cost increases. We don't need to worry about those. Don't worry about it. We'll lower rates, which is also probably true, but doesn't change the fact that the Federal Reserve has a job to be cautious and make sure that we don't create any sustained forms of inflation. That's really what's going on here. If I had the power, I'd love to lower rates, because I'm more concerned that we are going to see a substantial slowdown in the labor market at some point. We have no idea when that's going to be or if it's going to be. But that's what you want to protect right now. That's what everybody's nervous about. And so we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. But that said, kind of wild moment between Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve Chair. Must-see TV.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.